It always depends where you are uh, in a country. I mean, even in the United States, there are places that are not very secure. So I understand your point.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
every country has problems.
yeah, definitely, definitely. All right, Trump's. We're going to talk about Trump's proposed plan to intervene in Nigeria militarily and rescue his own quote unquote cherished Christians, who, as he wrongfully believes, are being massacred, killed with the support of the Nigerian government, and he's totally wrong in capital letters, totally wrong about that. So this has an element of international affairs in it, and that's why I'm bringing you in as an expert of security studies who knows a lot about security, not only of Europe and America, but also of the world. So to analyze what it means for America to intervene in a particular country, in a particular sovereign country like Nigeria militarily, and the consequences, the ramifications that may come, that may likely follow that proposed decision. And with, I don't know, any legal, political, diplomatic intricacies that are attached to these issues. So I think basically these are the things that we need to look at in this interview. My name is Umar Isa Dandago, and welcome to Global Arena TV.
Thank you very much for inviting me to your show. I'm excited to be on, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
Well, thank you very much indeed. For our viewers, I am joined by Armin Krishnan. He's an associate professor of security studies at East Carolina University in the United States of America. Once again, thank you, Professor, for joining us.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Should we start with a little bit of your background, Professor? When I first saw your name, Armin Krishnan, I thought I was going to speak to an Indian.
I'm half Indian.
Wow. And half
Yes.
German, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. So you're born in Germany and your parents are from India?
My father was from India, and I grew up in Germany. And then I started studying in England, and then I had an opportunity to go to the United States, and that's where I am right now.
Well, I used to be an English teacher, professor, and I used to teach my students not just the grammar, the vocabulary, but also the pronunciation. And I used to there's I think I need to there's, I need to I used to use this MP3 Bluetooth player to play to my English students speeches from great English speakers, journalists, professors, and so on and so forth, in order to teach them the differences between British and American English. I know this is not what we're talking about, but then it's quite interesting when I heard you have Indian, have German, now living in America, but speaking like in an amazing accent. Is that a German accent?
Yes, I'm German, so so you can still hear it.
That's fantastic. I need to learn German. So let's move on. One more question about your own field of studies. There's something you have come up with, a concept of fifth generation warfare. Can you briefly explain what that means? I don't know, how is it related to your field of studies? And maybe if we can find a way of connecting it to some of the things that we'll be discussing on this show.
Of course. So it goes back to the 1980s when military theorists were looking for a different theory of war, so conflict short of war. And they were coming up with a concept that was called fourth generation warfare. And that became an evolved insurgency. And, and that was a major interest uh, during the period. And in 2002, it was proposed that there could be fifth generation warfare. So the assumption was that there are several generations of warfare. The first one was a Napoleonic War, and that was driven by manpower. Then you have attrition warfare, that was the second generation of warfare, and that is uh, most associated with the First World War. And then you have maneuver warfare. That's the third generation of warfare. So that is associated with the Second World War. And then you have fourth generation warfare, which is associated with insurgency. And fifth generation warfare is, well, associated with the counterinsurgency paradigm. And it's a mode of warfare that is focused on influencing a society at large and that seeks to use information and
Hmm.
psychological operations for achieving some sort of objective. And it involves very little violence.
Hmm.
And if there is violence, it's usually hidden or dispersed.
Hmm.
And that makes it very difficult to understand whether you are in a fifth generation war or not. And yeah, it is a theory, so it's very hard to prove whether fifth generation warfare actually exists.
Hmm.
So it's a way of just thinking about war and what it could be. And yeah, my argument is that we are indeed experiencing fifth generation warfare. So it's very hard to understand who is the attacker and what are the objectives of the attacker. So it's mostly a war of psychological subversion and influence.
So when you say we are experiencing fifth generation warfare and we don't know who is the attacker and the motive behind the attacks and so on and so forth, that this is too much to take in. It's too weighty. Um, I don't know what's the role of technology, because right now, because of technology, I'm sure has enabled this kind of fifth generation warfare that you're talking about. Somebody from the comfort of his room can operate a drone and launch an airstrike on any place that he wants within a particular space or direction or distance or something like that. I don't know if I'm making sense, but then what's the role of technology in doing that?
Well, what's most important here is the role of the internet.
Hmm.
So the possibility of reaching any person in the world with information. And it's about shaping narratives and shaping behaviors. So manipulating minds. So that is at the core of fifth generation warfare. So you're using technology for doing that. And these days, artificial intelligence plays a major role in that as well. So you can use bots for pushing certain pieces of information and yeah, making it appear that it's popular. You don't really know whether you are interacting with a person or with AI. It has become that sophisticated. And yeah, I would imagine that AI will play a major role in the way we consume information and the way we are manipulated by information. So
So, yeah.
technology is important here.
And the West is responsible for whatever consequences that come that follows or follow this kind of thing, because it's the West that is in control of the technology that we're consuming, the AI, the social media, the internet, and so on and so forth. There was a time when I was thinking that the way we think is not the way we were supposed to think, because of the consumption of the media, the films, music, books, mostly coming from the West. Do I have a point when I say I'm not thinking like a typical conservative African man? I'm thinking mostly like an American because of the Americanism I have consumed from news, movies, books, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, we call it soft power. So
Okay.
influence of the media and culture, and we are spreading our morals and our values to other countries. And that has been done for a very long time. So it's nothing new, really, but it's getting more sophisticated and it's getting more covert. So we are no longer really noticing the influences that are impacting us in many ways. And yeah, it's very important to understand the role of digital technology. So most of the information we consume comes in digital form, and that makes it much easier to manipulate the information and to spread it. And yeah,
Yeah.
the medium that you're using is very
Mm.
important here.
So how can I counter that kind of narrative and also push my own cultural religious agenda, for example, not agenda in terms of agenda, but then use this medium that I'm using to push back by not push back in terms of force, but then in terms of soft power, push my own culture, my identity, my religion, or whatever. What do you think, for example, by me stopping wearing the suit and wear my own cultural attire, and also spread the good messages of my religion and my culture, or whatever, right?
Well, there's the argument of a clash of civilizations made by Samuel P. Huntington in the 1990s. And he was proposing that the world is getting split into separate civilizations. He was counting like 7 or 8. And he was suggesting that the civilizations will try to protect their own um, characteristics in terms of their values, culture, religion, and so on, and that will put them in conflict with each other. So, so that there will no longer be a possibility for one country or one culture to dominate the whole world. And I clearly see that happening. So we are seeing the world getting split into different civilizations, and we are seeing civilizational conflict. So you can interpret the conflict between the West and Russia as a civilizational conflict, and that's the way the Russians are looking at it.
Yes.
So it is quite natural that in Africa you probably also want to push back against Western influence. And yeah, there are obvious ways of going about it, and there are major countries like Nigeria that can take a leading role in that. And you can also work towards African unification, the African Union, in order to form an African civilization and to protect yourself against influences that you don't like.
That's absolutely fantastic. So let's move on. Now, what do you think about Donald Trump's approach to the security of the world at large, and then about his rhetoric towards Nigeria? What do you think about it when you first heard it?
Okay, the first thing you need to understand is that you can't take the president literally. He says a lot of things and he doesn't really mean it. So you have to very closely watch what he's actually doing. And from that, you can deduce what his intentions are and what he really cares about. So, from my analysis of Trump's foreign policy, I would say that he mostly cares about the great power conflict, so the dual containment of Russia and China. And he cares about resources, he cares about trade, and he cares about investment. His foreign policy is not driven by moral imperatives. He has a very realist, transactional approach. So he is always looking at getting some kind of good deal, getting some profit out of something. And I don't think that he really cares about Africa that much.
Okay.
So Africa is not one of the top priorities of the Trump administration. At the moment, they are looking at other kinds of conflicts. So the most important thing they have to deal with is the Ukraine war. And then they have to deal with the Gaza war situation. And then we have a third crisis with Venezuela. So it's much more likely that there would be an intervention in Venezuela rather than an intervention in Nigeria. So I would say you shouldn't be too worried about a US military intervention in Nigeria, which is very unlikely because the United States does not even have the military capability to do it.
What do you mean by saying the United States does not have a military capability to carry out a military intervention in Nigeria?
Well, first of all, you have to look at the patterns of US intervention in Africa. So the US has avoided putting large numbers of troops on the ground in Africa. The last time they did that was in Somalia in 1993. And that caused some casualties, and that was enough. I mean, I think 18 Rangers got killed in that Battle of Mogadishu,
Mm,
and the US decided to call it quits. And from then on, the US has avoided putting any kind of ground troops in Africa. And the last major intervention in Africa was the Libya War in 2011,
mm,
which was entirely an air campaign. So you also have to consider the size of the country. Nigeria is a country of 200 million people or more,
mm,
and you can't simply invade a country as big as this one. I mean, the
mm,
invasion of Iraq was difficult enough, and that was 20 million people living there,
mm,
or a little bit more than that.
mm,
And and they couldn't manage the occupation well. Imagine they have to deal with 10 times the population.
mm,
It's impossible. So the only thing they could possibly do is airstrikes. So limited airstrikes. Even that is difficult because the United States doesn't have many bases in Africa, especially no air bases in Africa.
mm,
So they would have to conduct that air campaign either from naval assets, such as aircraft carriers, or from Europe, which is already very far away
yeah.
to sustain any air campaign. I mean, Libya was much closer to
Mm,
Europe, so
yes.
that was much easier to do. But Nigeria, that's like 2,000 miles away
Mm.
from Europe. And that's the reason why I consider it very unlikely that there could be any major military intervention in Nigeria.
Okay, but then previously in the beginning we talked about um, the nature of the warfare that we are experiencing in this world. 2025 has seen some wars dominated by drones and technology and so on and so forth. Um, yeah, don't you think even if America does not have enough troops to send to Nigeria, it can likely send in drones, for example?
Well, the US did have some drone bases in Africa, and there was a drone base in Niger, which was closed down last year. So our footprint in Africa is shrinking. And if you think about the drones, they can't do a whole lot of damage.
Mm,
I
yeah.
mean, the Predator drones, they can carry, what, 8 missiles?
Mm,
I mean, you can't really wage a major war with those kinds of weapons. And the way they were used in Pakistan was for targeted killings. So they were trying to identify terrorists or militants who they would strike with those drones, but you can't use it for a major air campaign. I
mm.
don't think it would make much of a difference. You can't do counterinsurgency from the air with drones. So I don't think we have the capability for doing that.
Okay, so strategically speaking, um, it's it's a fantasy when Donald Trump said he's going to send in troops into Nigeria, guns a blazing. That is not even possible. So the Nigerian government should go back and sleep and relax that Trump is lying about that, right?
Yeah, that's my impression. I mean, we have worked with African militaries through ACOTA, so the African Contingency Operations Training and Assistance Program. And we are working with, I mean, the United States is working with the Nigerian military. So we have military trainers in Nigeria, and there's military cooperation going on. But we do not have any capability for conducting operations inside of Nigeria not authorized by the Nigerian government. That would be very difficult to do. It would be a very dangerous thing to do. And I don't think that Donald Trump would take the risk. Because if US troops are getting killed, even in small numbers, that looks very bad. So we always want to avoid that.
Yeah, definitely. I put out a post on my social media handles asking my followers to send in a question to you. And this one, Abdullahi, says he said, I'm basing my question on the genocide comments of Donald Trump. Um, Intervention against who is question. Is it is Donald Trump launching an intervention in Nigeria against the government or the terrorists, assuming this is what he's going to carry on with?
Well, my understanding of the situation, and it's very limited, is that the United States is are very concerned about Chinese influence in Africa, and in particular Chinese influence in Nigeria. And that may be the one thing that's actually driving our interest in that country. So he may be thinking about changing the government in Nigeria if he's not happy with the current government. And that's usually done through covert action. So covert means and not really through military means. So, I mean, he's also trying to do that in Venezuela, trying to destabilize the Venezuelan government and trying to get some kind of revolution uprising going against the government in order to replace it with a government that is acting more in accordance to the US objectives in the region. So that's a possibility
Mm.
that he is seeking to undermine the stability of Nigeria through covert means.
And when you say through covert means, like they're trying to do in Venezuela, and I think like they tried to do some years ago in Venezuela. What does that mean? Does that mean like CIA is coming in or going into Venezuela or coming into Nigeria to do what exactly, for example?
Well, it can be a paramilitary operation. So you're working with paramilitary groups that conduct an insurgency against the government. So you might be supplying training and weapons to that group. And you can also provide assistance in terms of propaganda. So that's the information warfare component to
Mm,
it as well. And you can combine it with other tools of statecraft, which is diplomatic pressure and economic warfare, such as using sanctions for destabilizing the government. And you're obviously trying to control the narrative and paint the government as terrorist. I mean, in Venezuela, the narrative is that Maduro is a cartel leader, a narco terrorist, and that would give the United States the permission
mm,
to go in,
mm,
use military force against the government of Venezuela if necessary, and to overthrow the government of Venezuela because we called them narco terrorists. And I don't know uh, what the narrative is with respect to Nigeria.
mm,
So it seems that there's an emphasis on counterterrorism
mm,
as a potential justification, saying that he has to protect certain groups within the
mm.
country because the government is not willing to do that. And yeah, that could be a pretext for an intervention, but at the moment, I don't think that there's any capability for that. So covert action would be really trying to find some dissatisfied groups in the country and then stir them up using propaganda and potentially arm them. So that would be the more extreme option.
Morally speaking, do you think that's a good idea?
No, I'm against interventionism. I don't think that covert action is very effective. In particular, paramilitary covert action has proven to be very problematic in terms of long-term effects. So it can cause permanent instability in countries. I mean, the US has conducted paramilitary operations in Africa during the Cold War, in particular in Congo, and that messed up the country for a long time, right? So
Mm, yeah.
so it can create permanent instability where you have governments, so one dictatorship after another, that is very corrupt
Mm,
and very brutal. And yeah, you're not doing something good for a country
that's correct.
using that approach.
Okay. I understand that people like Dick Cheney, who died like a month ago, were the ones, people like Colin Powell were the ones who lured George W. Bush in 2003 to go into Iraq under the pretext of WMDs, weapons of mass destructions, which were later found out to be nowhere. It's a hoax, to use Donald Trump's words. It's a lie. Do you think Donald Trump is this brilliant enough not to be cajoled, persuaded, or even tricked into going into a particular country like Nigeria because of one type of misinformation or the other?
Well, it's a difficult thing to say. I mean, initially, it appeared that he's a non-interventionist politician, so he was campaigning on the issue that he's a peacemaker
Hmm.
and that he doesn't want to start any major wars. On the other hand, there are neocons in his administration,
Wow.
like Pete Hegseth or
Hmm.
Marco Rubio,
Wow.
and they could be pushing him to carry out a major war against another country. And that is a concern because Donald Trump, I think he lacks moral principles. So he changes his opinion quite a lot, and that makes him very unpredictable. And yeah, you're right. There is a possibility that those neocons in his administration could lure him into a conflict that is very unwise,
Hmm.
and very counterproductive. I mean, we know what happened with Iraq. It was a terrible mistake. Everybody understands it. It
Hmm.
wasn't good for the United States itself. It cost a lot of money, and we didn't get anything out of that war. So actually, our relationship with Iraq is broken, and it has undermined the leadership of the U.S. in the Middle East. So so it has created a lot of problems, and hopefully there won't be a major war, but I can't be confident about it.
Yeah, definitely. I always remember Ambassador John Bolton. He's also said to be a neocon, former national security advisor, and he has been kicked out of the administration. I mean, he's no longer in the Trump 2.0 administration for some reasons, and now he has been going around the world criticizing Donald Trump, saying that this guy is not as brilliant as he says he is. There was a time when they were traveling on Air Force, and people like Ambassador John Bolton and the rest of these from the security and intelligence team were trying to brief him, and he was busy watching a football match, a soccer match. And then he was about to deliver. He was supposed to deliver a speech after they landed in Europe or somewhere like that. I don't know. This is becoming more and more complicated of Donald Trump, a man who claimed or who still claims to have solved 8 wars, now counting. I don't know. What do you think about this?
But I think he is a master in self-promotion. He's coming out of the show business, so he's a great showman, and he likes to take credit for all sorts of things that he really shouldn't be taking credit for. So he likes exaggerating things. So I don't think he has really solved 8 wars or resolved the conflicts underlying them.
Mhm.
But he likes to portray himself as a peacemaker.
Okay.
So that's part of his image, and you shouldn't take it too seriously, as
Okay.
many things that he says.
So his diplomacy, his style of diplomacy is being controlled, dictated to by someone or some people. Like you said, Pete Hegseth and Marco Rubio are the neocons in his circle, and are they the ones like running the show, calling the shots?
No, I don't think that they are running the show, but they have a huge influence on the president. And they have direct access to the president, and they have some influence on him.
Mm.
And yeah, I think the problem is that Donald Trump is not really good at foreign policy. I mean, when he was a presidential candidate in 2016, he knew very little about foreign policy. And I'm not sure how much he has learned since.
Okay.
And and that means that a lot of people around him can have a huge influence on his decisions because he doesn't really understand it too well.
And Professor, I don't know why is it that people are not talking about this? And you are the right person to answer my question. Um, for a couple of months, the US has not had a national security advisor. We remember the Signal Gate scandal that involved Pete Hegseth and this guy, Mike Waltz, the then national security advisor. And all that happened was he was relegated to the UN and he's serving as the US ambassador to the United Nations. And Marco Rubio is doubling as both national security advisor and also Secretary of State. I don't know, why is it that people are not talking about the US not having a national security advisor, which is a very sensitive position?
Well, I mean, that situation existed before with Henry Kissinger, who also had that double function of Secretary of State and being National Security Advisor. And I mean, the way I interpret it is that the National Security Council is no longer that important as it used to be.
Mm.
And also, the role of the National Security Advisor is no longer as important as it used to be. So, I mean, Trump had like five different national security advisors in his first administration. So he likes to change those people, and and
Mm.
there's not much continuity, you know. And
Yeah.
we'll see who is going to get that position. But I don't think that the national security advisor is really very influential in the Trump administration. So the Secretary of State position is much more important here.
So, from a security point of view, isn't there a problem when you have a country as big, as large, and complex as the United States, but not having a national security advisor?
Well, he has a national security advisor. It's just that
Hmm.
this national security advisor is also the Secretary of State. But the thing is, it's very hard to say how Donald Trump is making his. So it really depends on the people around him who influence him. And yeah, there's a problem with US national security strategy and consistency in US foreign policy. I mean, a lot of people have complained. Yeah, this means that US foreign policy can appear to be aimless. We don't really know exactly what we want, and our objectives seem to be changing all the time. And that makes it very hard for other countries to deal with the United States.
Okay. So it's not a problem because, like, I don't know, US also has been having its own share of security things. Recently, two National Guard officers were shot in Washington D.C., very close to the White House, and the woman, the female officer, was killed or is now dead. And we hear of mass shootings in different parts of the US almost every single day. People get killed. Um, what does that mean? Does that mean that maybe the US should have its own internal security rights before going out to dictate to other countries what to do and what not to do with their own national security?
Well, you have to understand that the US is still the global hegemon, or at least that's the way they think of themselves. So the US still has the ambition to have primacy in the international relations, in the international system, and we have global interests. And that's the reason why we want to influence things in other countries, including through direct meddling in the affairs of other countries. And as I pointed out, our main concern is the competition with China and to some extent also with Russia. And that's driving a lot of US foreign policy. And you're right that the US also suffers from internal instability. So we are in the late stage of empire. So the empire is crumbling from within. And yeah, we have political instability here. So we have radicalization both on the right as well as on the left. And we have insecurity. So we're dealing with terrorism as well,
Mm,
like other countries. So since 2017, we have an increased focus on domestic terrorism. It's no longer about Islamic terrorism that used to be the major focus
mm.
for Homeland Security. Now we're dealing with domestic terrorism and radicalization. And yeah, that has to do with the political polarization that we are seeing in the United States.
Okay, I understand. This is a very serious issue. So, is it true that the US has a law that allows it to send troops into a sovereign nation and invade or launch attacks in in any country, for example?
No, I don't think so. The United States is subject to international law, and there are only three conditions under which it is legal to use force in an international context. The
Mm,
first thing is self-defense. So if you are getting attacked, you have the right to respond to the attack, including to use force against the attacker. Then the second context is a UN Security Council resolution. So if the UN Security Council decides that force can be used in a certain context, then it's legal.
mhm.
And the third one is security assistance. So if another government requests from the United States security assistance, then the US can use force as permitted by the host government.
Yes.
But the way it has been interpreted is that we take the self-defense condition very loosely or very broad. So during the George W. Bush administration, there was the Bush Doctrine, which was about anticipatory self-defense in relation to weapons of mass destruction. So we wouldn't be waiting until we are attacked. We would eliminate the threat before it materializes.
Okay.
So the Bush Doctrine didn't go anywhere. After Iraq, it was no longer invoked. So that is done. What happened during the Obama administration was the interpretation that we could use force against countries that are unwilling or unable to suppress terrorist threats that emanate from their territory. So according to the Obama administration, we could use targeted killings in places like Pakistan if the Pakistani government was unwilling or unable to suppress the terrorist threat against the United States. So that kind of logic could apply to Nigeria as well. So the US could say the Nigerian government is unwilling or unable to suppress a terrorist threat against the United States and would use that as a justification to carry out limited strikes against terrorists in Nigeria.
Okay, back then during Obama, when drone attacks were very rampant in Pakistan, was there any threat, existential threat, however, whatever type of threat against the Americans in Pakistan?
Well, it was all driven by the Afghanistan war. So the idea was to deny the Taliban a safe haven in Pakistan. And the initial strategy was to just go after the high value targets, which was the Taliban leaders and the Al Qaeda leaders in the tribal territories of
Mm,
Pakistan. And that was done with the permission of the Pakistani government until around 2008, when there was a change in the government. So the Musharraf government ended, and there was a new democratic government in Pakistan, and they had different ideas about the cooperation with the United States. And the Obama administration also didn't notify the Pakistani government about the strikes anymore. They were massively expanding the strikes, and Pakistan got really angry about it because it was undermining the original deal, which was the Pakistani government would tolerate the strikes and wouldn't say anything about it, but the strikes would be coordinated closely between the United States and Pakistan. And and then that kind of deal changed. So we didn't care anymore about Pakistan and what they wanted. And yeah, and that caused the breach in the relationship between the United States and Pakistan around 2011.
Okay.
And
Yeah, and then the Americans went in and claimed to have killed Osama bin Laden in Pakistan, right?
yeah, that was in May 2011. And yeah, the idea was really to support the campaign in Afghanistan.
Okay.
And that was the justification. So US soldiers were attacked by the Taliban in Afghanistan, and we needed to expand the battlefield into Pakistan because that was the safe haven for the terrorists.
Okay, I understand then in Pakistan, there was this theory, and I don't know if I could call it a law, this idea that American interests and Americans were being targeted in Pakistan. Um, uh, but now that Trump is claiming to come into Nigeria, do you have any idea whatsoever of an American interest, not even interest, but an American citizen being harmed, affected by insurgency in Nigeria? And that's why Trump wants to come in?
I'm not aware of any of that. I'm not an Africa specialist. I'm not following the news closely related to Africa, but that could be a potential justification for an intervention. So if US citizens would be in danger, then the president could try to take action to protect the citizens and try to evacuate the citizens using special operations, using military assets for doing that. And it has been done in other conflicts as well. So they have evacuated Americans from Israel before the war or when the war started there in 2023. And yeah, that's something the United States could do.
Okay, but then okay, as a Nigerian and a journalist covering the country and beyond, I don't think that the American citizens living in Nigeria are facing any existential threat. And even to go by Donald Trump's statement, he was saying that Christianity, as he said, quote unquote, Christianity is facing an existential threat in Nigeria, and that he's ordering the Department of War to prepare our plan to come in and save, to come in guns a-blazing in order to save his cherished Christians. Like to be clear, plainly clear, he's not. It's not like Americans that are facing existential threats in Nigeria. It is Nigerian Christians, in his own words, being killed, and that the state is behind it, the country is behind it, which the government and independent researchers have condemned and proven him wrong. So let's move on. When I think I told you in my first email that some Nigerians, including politicians, are calling on Donald Trump to come in and intervene in Nigeria to help us with our own security problems. When you hear citizens of a particular country asking the US to intervene in their own country militarily, what comes to your mind? Do you think that's a good call or a terrible call because they don't know They were not in Iraq in 2003 and 4. They were not in Libya in 2011. They had not lived in Afghanistan for 20 odd years. What do you think?
Well, if ordinary citizens call for a foreign intervention, it has no legal validity. The only party that could call for assistance is the Nigerian government. So if the Nigerian government decides that they need help from the United States, they can ask for it. And the US can provide military aid, security assistance, military training, and things like that. They can provide equipment, they can provide humanitarian relief. And that would be all done in cooperation between the two governments. But simply an ordinary citizens or a political party calling for an intervention, that is something that the US government doesn't have to respond to.
Okay, but then they claim that some Nigerians have written to the U.S. government. I mean, when I said some Nigerians, those Nigerians who think, the Christians who think they are being killed and that the state is behind it, and like you talked about, using a covert operation. I'm not saying there is a covert mission here, but then you talked about using a covert operation to prop up the opposition in order to rebel against any government. Those people who wrote to the US government think, and some of them are believed not to be living in Nigeria. Some of them have been in the US for an extended period of time, so they don't have a picture of what is currently happening. Do you think a president like Trump or a government like the Trump administration may likely consider these letters from these individual citizens that have written? Some of them have organizations, associations, or whatever in Nigeria, and then they are not the government, but then they are the ones that took the reports. Some of them manufactured reports, fabricated reports to the US government.
Well, obviously, there's a similar situation with respect to South Africa. So the white South Africans have asked for help from the president, and the president has allowed many white South Africans to emigrate from South Africa and become US citizens or get a green card in the United States. So that kind of thing can happen. As it concerns in intervention, the way it played out in Libya was the following. So there were mass protests that turned violent. And then the US government and the European governments were pushing for a UN Security Council resolution to establish a no-fly zone in Libya. And that was used as a justification for intervention. So they were conducting a bombing campaign under the justification of protecting innocent civilians against the Gaddafi military. And in reality, they were bombing the Gaddafi military regardless whether they were actually threatening any civilians or not. So you can, I mean, that was the so-called responsibility to protect doctrine. So the argument was if a government is conducting genocide or is doing ethnic cleansing or is failing to protect the citizenry, then the international community has a responsibility to intervene and to establish security for the innocent civilians there. So that's how it could play out. So if they organize mass protests, the mass protests become violent, then there could be calls for an international intervention, and that could lead to overthrowing the existing government and replacing it with a new government.
Okay, so I understand there was a protest, popular protest, which began late 2013 to 2014 in Ukraine called the Maidan Revolution. I had an interview with someone in Russia, a very anti-America American guy, so anti-America that he even made some explosive statement that the Maidan Revolution was engineered by the CIA, and some people from the U.S. intelligence community were there, and they toppled the Viktor Yanukovych government. Was that true?
Well, I find it likely. I mean, we have a history of doing that. I mean, I've written about it as well. So there's the National Endowment for Democracy, and there are other State Department affiliated NGOs, and they provide money to for democratization, and that includes activist groups, organizations affiliated with opposition parties, and that is used for steering countries in a certain direction. I mean, actually, a lot of countries have kicked out the US pro-democracy NGOs because of these exact issues. So they have sponsored protests, protest movements. The first major one was the bulldozer revolution in Yugoslavia, Serbia, in 2000. And then you had the Rose Revolution in Georgia and the yeah, there were a whole bunch of
Yeah.
so-called color revolutions, the Arab Spring, and every time you had the involvement of those Western pro-democracy NGOs. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I think that has been done since the 1980s, when they were founded in 1983. And we have been using it as a so-called soft power tool for influencing the politics in other countries, and sometimes also for overthrowing governments with the use of color revolutions. And yeah, I think it's plausible that there was a Western involvement in the whole Euromaidan story in 2014. We know that Victoria Nuland was there. She was the senior State Department person for Europe. She was visiting Kiev in December 2013 when the protests were there, handing out cookies. I mean, it was pretty obvious, actually.
So, Professor, we're moving towards the end of the program. Let me ask you, okay, contemporarily speaking, even this week, this is what we have been hearing on the news, that there is a 28-point plan put forward by the Trump administration to end the Ukraine war. But then the Ukrainians have been echoing that in most, if not all, of the Trump so-called plans to end their own war, they have not been involved. It's only between him, Steve Witkoff, and the Russians that are calling the shots. And some Trump critics are even saying that some of those points in the Trump 28-point plan in the document have been dictated to by the Russians. Is it true? And if yes, what are we seeing now?
Well, I mean, there was a meeting between Putin and Trump in Anchorage, in Alaska, during summer. And I think they were discussing a peace plan. And I think the 28 points were coming out of that. And it's meant to address some of the major Russian concerns. And obviously, since Russia is winning the war, we have to pay attention to what the Russians want in order to be able to end the war, at least in part on our conditions, because if we wait much longer, then the Russians will have achieved a more decisive victory and will be able to dictate everything in terms of the conditions for peace. So I think we have to accommodate the Russians to some extent because it reflects the reality on the ground. So if you're losing, you have to make concessions, right?
But then the Ukrainians are saying that if we ask them to make concessions, it means that Russia would annex more territories, and possibly its own plan of invading Ukraine would just go ahead, because we don't know whether in the next couple of years Putin is not coming back to also get another chunk of land from Ukraine.
Well, you have to look at the underlying reasons for the conflict. why did Russia invade Ukraine in the first place? It was about NATO membership, and it was about protecting Russians living in the eastern part of Ukraine. So there is a predominantly Russian population in the Donbass, and the Russians saw it as the right thing to do to protect those people against the Ukrainian nationalism. And that was a problem. I mean, there were also some military clashes happening since 2014. So the conflict was continuing. I mean, it actually started in 2014. And I don't think that it's the Russian objective to take the whole of Ukraine. That's a totally wrong perception. I think they want to have the eastern part of Ukraine and the southern part of Ukraine. They may want to take Odessa and deny the Ukrainians any access to the Black Sea. And that's a likely objective. But I don't think they are interested in having the western part of Ukraine because then they would have to do counterinsurgency and they would have to deal with a lot of problems that they don't want to deal with. And what they want really to achieve is a Ukraine that has very little military capability and has no ability to threaten the new Russian possessions in eastern Ukraine and the south.
Okay. Um, let's come back to the issue of Nigeria because there's a question that slipped my mind when I asked you about some Nigerians begging the US to intervene militarily. Looking at examples, Iraq, Afghanistan, can we say can we add Venezuela to the list and the rest? Libya also. Can we would you paint a picture of the consequences that likely follow those invasions, those military interventions? Because some people believe that wherever American military goes, um, it leaves behind a disaster. What more can you say to that?
Well, it's a general problem of international intervention, no matter who does it. Because it's just a matter of the objectives and incentives. So you can't occupy a country forever. I mean, there are usually very limited objectives for the intervention. And at some point, the interveners decide to pack up and leave. And that's usually premature. So we also left Iraq prematurely in 2011. And that was at the time when the country was still not fully stabilized. You only have a few examples where you had a military occupation that actually worked out for the country that was occupied, and that was Germany and Japan. But these were very long-term occupations. Actually, Germany is still occupied as
Oh,
well as Japan. Yeah, they still have US troops in Germany.
oh, that's
So I don't think that Germany is fully sovereign, even at this point.
wow. That that's explosive. And I mean, it's I don't know. I've never heard this, and the point of view is kind of amazing. So underneath, under the carpet, it's the US that is calling the shots in Germany. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the US has a very strong influence on Germany, and part of that has to do with the agreements made after the end of the Second World War. And I don't think that that Germany is fully sovereign. So we had to make certain concessions to have some autonomy. I mean, we have an autonomous government, but we still have to of respect the wishes of the United States, in part because they are still there and they still have large numbers of troops in Germany.
And has the US presence in Germany done more harm than good, or the other way around?
Well, I mean, there have been positive aspects to it. I mean, clearly during the Cold War, the presence of the United States military was very welcome because they protected us from the Soviet Union. But after the end of the Cold War, I mean, there's a question whether Germany should be fully sovereign. I mean, the deal that they made was European integration. Germany should be integrated into a larger Europe in a European superstate, and and that doesn't seem to be working out very well. And we are still heavily dependent on the United States and Germany.
Oh, that's awesome. So, still, okay, I'm very much interested in the American role in Europe, the geopolitics and the complexities of that. But then, one of the key issues that we're talking about is the Nigerian versus U.S. relations when it comes to this issue of Christian persecution and so on and so forth. Um, as an expert, as a security expert, there are people, even among the politicians and others in the academia, let alone the ordinary people, who believe that the security situation, the insecurity, the terrorism, the banditry, and whatever that Nigeria has been facing has been engineered abroad. There are people outside of Nigeria who are interested in seeing Nigeria unstable, destabilized. What do you think? In whose interest would that be? Who do you think would be much happier, much richer, more influential when, and God forbid, if Nigeria is unstable?
Well, that's the old games of empires. You destabilize other countries because then you have an opportunity to influence them. So if there's a lot of insecurity in Nigeria, it means that they need a lot of help from outside powers who can provide that security. I mean, that was the old game of the colonial powers like Great Britain. And they deliberately destabilized other countries to take them over. And yeah, that may be happening with respect to Nigeria, which is an interesting target for that because of the oil resources, the natural resources in Nigeria. I understand it's a very wealthy country in terms of natural resources, and and that makes it of interest to other empires such as the United States, such as China. So,
Hmm.
so there are many different parties that could be involved in destabilizing Nigeria in order to gain greater influence over the Nigerian government.
So it's not a conspiracy theory when people are peddling this type of narrative.
No, I don't think so. I think it's a pretty established practice. I mean, you might have heard of the confessions of an economic hitman.
So that is true. It's not a conspiracy theory, economic hitman theory.
No, I think you're controlling developing countries through the debt. So you're creating instability, you're creating problems that cause the country to go into greater debt, and then you have leverage over those countries. You have leverage over the elites, and that enables you to exploit those countries
Okay. Uh,
using debt as a
yeah,
mechanism.
using debt, of course, World Bank, IMF loans, and so on and so
Yeah.
forth. Now, there was a time when I had a serious debate on my then radio show when I was in Kano with a professor who believes that the US likely is behind, and the Western countries in general are the ones behind the debt trap that our African countries have found themselves in. Nigeria has been borrowing a lot of money from World Bank and IMF and so on and so forth. And we have not, I think Nigeria is going to have to spend a lot of years servicing those debts. And literally, even our great children may not may not be able to finish servicing those debts. So this, and it was like his argument is that it's a deliberate thing. The West is using some people, some politicians that they have sponsored, leading us, ruling us, serving as our leaders in order to achieve those objectives. What do you say about this?
I think China is taking the same approach. The Belt and Road Initiative, the major infrastructure program, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank.
Mm,
And they're also providing loans. They are
mm,
also trying to gain influence on
mm.
on African countries in particular.
Yes.
So Russia is also very active in Africa. And I mean, it's not just the West doing it. The members are doing it as well.
Okay.
And the end game here is always getting greater access to resources, cheap resources.
So this is problematic. There's this concept of scramble for Africa. India has also joined the race. Turkey is also coming into Africa. Most of these big countries, we already know about America and European countries. I don't know what makes Africa this. Can I use the word target since we're talking about security?
Well, I mean, historically, it has always been about natural resources.
Yeah.
Africa is very wealthy in terms of natural resources, in terms of minerals, in
Mm,
particular, metals, and the oil and gas.
mm,
So that is something that other powers need.
mm,
And the other consideration now is population.
mm,
So Africa is very populous, so it has a lot of potential human capital, a lot of workers, you know.
mm.
So that there are many reasons why other powers are interested in Africa. I mean, Africa is also becoming a larger consumer market, export market for Western products. So there are reasons why outside powers want to invest and trade with Africa, and why they want to have greater influence on African politics to make sure that they get the best deal.
I have no words to express my gratitude to you, but to thank you very much indeed, Professor, for finding your time to speak to me.
Oh, my pleasure. It has been great to talk to you. I rarely talk to African people. I mean, from Africa and in Africa. So it's quite interesting to get your perspective on things because we are pretty insulated in the United States. We don't really know that much what's going on in the world, especially in developing countries. And yeah, we need more perspectives from the developing world.
Definitely. And also here in Nigeria, we have a lot of great analysts from the university, from private sector, and journalists and ex-diplomats who appear on national TV channels and radio stations to speak to us. But what the niche that I have taken is getting, it's hard, I have to say, but getting people like you from those countries, from America, from Europe, from China, from India, to speak about the global politics from your own point of view. I understand that when you're speaking to an Indian, he's giving an Indian point of view. When you're speaking to a European, they are giving European perspectives, and you are Americans, you're giving American perspectives. So I I understand that this is important because sometimes we tend to understand things differently, and that we need to hear from the horse's mouth. You are the experts from America, living in America, spending years, decades researching about American politics and European security and so on and so forth. So I believe you are going to give me and us fresh, first-hand perspective, coupled with our African point of view that would go a long way in giving us a kind of weighty information for our consumption.
Yep.
Yeah,
Sounds great.
yeah, it sounds great. And so, viewers, that has been an interesting and engaging conversation between me, Umar Isa Andogo, the host of Global Arena podcast, and Professor Armin Krishnan from East Carolina University there in the United States of America. And I believe we have learned a lot from the ocean of his knowledge, and the analysis has been very incisive, very interesting, and very educative. So we wish Professor all the best, and we're looking forward to hosting him and a lot more of people from his own caliber in order to continue picking from their own brains, from their own knowledge. Professor, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us.
Yep, has been a pleasure. Nice talking to you.
Yeah, and in just under a minute, what can you say about me, about my podcast, about the interview, the style, and everything?
Okay, I wish you all the best and good success with your show. You're a good journalist.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed for all the good words.
Okay,
I wish you all the
then
best. So, bye bye. Take care.
yeah, bye.
Yeah. So, well.